that this is some kind of high capacity storage medium, and it's not a Blu-ray, not HD DVD, and it's of course certainly not a standard DVD either. So this is therefore, it has to be the versatile multi-layer disc. So my next job was to sit down and watch my first and most likely last feature film on this HD-VMD format. Would this supposedly cheaper alternative to Blu-ray and HD DVD prove just as watchable? Would I even notice a difference from any other 1080p video source? Okay, so after watching the movie, what are my impressions? Well, first off, I enjoyed the movie. It's a long time since I've seen it, and I'd forgotten what had happened, and it's a good, fun film. So if you ever get the opportunity to watch it, yeah, do. But taking it more critically, I started looking at the image, trying to see if there was anything particularly wrong with it. Any blocking in it, and of course the soundtrack Dolby Digital 5.1, nice and clear. But I did start to notice it was a bit soft, to use a technical term. It was smushy. I don't know, it just seemed like a kind of a little bit blurry. Now I was wondering if that was quality of the transfer, because some of the early HD video disc titles that came out in 2006, 2007, they weren't the best quality of transfers, and I put it down perhaps to that. Maybe it's down to the transfer rather than the video disc format. After all, an HD VMD is totally capable of holding an HD movie. The player will play it back in 1080p. We're not talking interlaced or anything weird here. So there's no reason for it to look kind of smushy and a little bit soft, other than, well, something else has gone wrong somewhere along the lines. I mean, let's just talk about video disc capacity for a moment. How much could you get on an HD VMD? The specs for VMD changed quite a bit during the development stage. However, at the time of launch, at the end of 2007, the specifications on the website then stated that there were two types of VMD, a VMD 15 and a VMD 20. Now, elsewhere they'd mentioned VMDs would come in varieties containing 3, 4, or 5 layers. And since they'd earlier stated that a layer would hold 5 gigabytes of data, it doesn't take a genius to see that the VMD 15 is a 15 gigabyte comprising of 3 layers, and the VMD 20 is the 4-layer 20 gigabyte disk, and presumably that 5-layer 25 gigabyte version had been pushed back. Oh, and you might have spotted them stating the video bitrate was 45 megabits a second there. Well, that's a little bit cheeky. That's the maximum bitrate. They did like to mix and match their stats to make things look good, because down below they've said you can fit up to 3 hours of HD video on one disc. Well, if you were to do that at a rate of 45 megabits a second, that would take over 60 gigabytes worth of storage, which would mean you'd have to split it across 3 of their largest size of disc. So given what I've said already about bit rates and file sizes, this 110-minute movie, if it was encoded in VC1 and it was done at 20 megabits a second, I've calculated out that it would need to be stored on the VMD20 disc, the larger of the two sizes, the 20 gigabyte version. So let's have a closer look at this disc and see if there are any clues to its capacity. Okay, well, first off, there's nothing about the disc size that's on the printed side. So if we flip it over, we look very closely at the center, we can see some text printed on there in reverse. So if I mirror this video, we can see that this says, lucky number Slevin, 3L, layer 2. So to me, 3L would seem to indicate that this is a 3-layer disc. Let's see what else is printed on here. Well, now this one is, but this time printed the right way around, but in a distorted text along the outer edge of this section, we can just make out that this again says lucky number Slevin 3L, but this time it says layer 1, and then after that is printed the word reverse in brackets. So rotating it a little bit further around again, printed the correct way around again this time, is the film title, and that is followed by layer 0. So that is all that's visible, but from that we can see that this is a disc that contains layers labelled up as 0, 1 and 2. So everything that I could see from looking at the physical disc seemed to point to the fact that this was using the 3-layer system, the VMD 15, the 15 gigabyte variant, the smaller of the 2 VMD discs, which was an odd choice, because what they've had to do is squash down the bit rate, reduce it so that this film will fit into 15 gigabytes, whereas instead they could have put it at a decent bitrate on a VMD20. I mean, after all, you are trying to wow the public at this point. You're trying to get them interested in high definition. You're trying to get them to upgrade from a DVD to an HD-VMD system. And to do that, you're going to have to impress them with the video quality. But if you squash down your bitrate of a 1080p movie, it barely looks any different to a standard DVD. It's certainly not going to impress anyone. And on a similar note, any people buying DVD would have been expecting some DVD extras, so let's see what you get on this HD-VMD. Well, I'm going to have to brighten this image up a bit because the printing on here is pretty bad. But you can see on this one, you don't really get very much. You get the English language version of the film with a choice of stereo or 5.1 Dolby soundtracks. You get a variety of subtitles for the Scandinavian markets where this particular disc was distributed, but that would have the cheek to list the scene selection as an extra feature. In order to get this movie to fit onto the lower capacity 3-layer disc, it would suggest to me that the 4-layer version was either not impossible to produce. Either that, or it costs quite a bit more to make a 4-layer disc than a 3-layer one, which, again, if true, would negate the whole point of the product existing in the first place. And there's one unexpected thing that's immediately noticeable about the disc when you first pick it up, in that it's really got quite a sharp and jagged edge. You could probably cut yourself with this if you tried hard enough. It feels like the disc had been cut version was rushed to market, very difficult, if not ready, impossible to produce. I still have some unanswered questions with regards to these it costs quite a bit more to make a 4-layer disc than a 3-layer one, which, again, if true, would negate the whole point of the product existing in the first place. And there's one unexpected thing that's immediately noticeable about the disc when you first pick it up, in that it's really got quite a sharp and jagged edge. You could probably cut yourself with this if you tried hard enough. It feels a finished product that was rushed to market. With regard to the soft video quality, was it purely down to overly aggressive? For example, do HD-VMD players just output rather soft-looking video anyway, so that's as good as it could ever look? They're super sharp, so we know the player is capable of really clear, sharp video. So maybe it's down to the original film negative they used, the transfer process, to 2007 and find a version of Lucky Number Slevin, an alternative version that came out then, to be able to compare the HD-VMD against it. And I got hold of the Blu-ray version. Now, in the US, this came out in 2008. It used an AVC codec, so that wouldn't be any use because it's using a different codec. It's a little bit later. This is a 2007 version that came out in Europe, and this is using a VC1 codec. So I thought this would be a good thing to compare with the HD-VMD. Now, before we found a making of feature, and then in addition to the Dolby Digital soundtrack on here, this one also has a DTS version. And then this is curious. The Blu-ray says that the film is being presented in an aspect ratio of 2.4:1, whereas the VMD was in 69. I do remember it filling up my TV screen as well. So I had a look on IMDb, and it turns out the film was shot in Super 35 and then masked off for the theatrical 2.35:1.